Being a marketer's no sweat. You just have to manage dozens of channels, launch hundreds of campaigns, score thousands of leads, and okay, fine, it's a lot of sweat. Unless you have HubSpot's AI-powered marketing tools to help you do all that and more. Get started at HubSpot.com/marketers.
Imagine what's possible when learning doesn't get in the way of life. At Capella University, our game-changing FlexPath learning format lets you set your own deadlines so you can learn at a time and pace that works for you. It's an education you can tailor to your schedule. That means you don't have to put your life on hold to pursue your professional goals. Instead, enjoy learning your way and earn your degree without missing a beat. A different future is closer than you think with Capella University. Learn more at capella.edu.
At the Musial with Alan and Daniel, we'll talk about the Cardinals all night long. Everyone come gather round, listen to your favorite sound. We'll talk about the Cardinals all night long. We'll talk the games and all the rest, about the team that we love best. We'll talk about the Cardinals all night long. We're gonna talk about the Cardinals all night long.
Good morning. Welcome into another edition of Meet Me at Musial. I'm your host, Daniel Shopta at C70. With me, as always, Alan Medlock, A Medlock 1, coming to you Saturday morning after the World Series has kicked off. We are at most 6 games away from the winter of, I don't know. We'll see what kind of winter it is for the Cardinals. But before we get into all that, let's talk a little bit about last night, because it's interesting that there has been a Cardinal reference connection. I don't know how you want to phrase it. But you didn't expect to hear Mike Matheny's name come up this offseason or this postseason. And yet after the first game of the World Series, that's what we're hearing.
It's one of those situations to where the pluses way outweigh the negatives.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how else to say it, but yeah, great game, great matchup. I've been fired up all week about this, and poor pitching choices. We've seen them before, and we kind of take it personal, and it is what it is. But what a matchup though. You have Ohtani, Judge. You have when Mookie Betts is third on that list, that says a lot. And then the best of the best guys, Freeman with a walk-off slam, first one ever in World Series history, and that's you can't top that. It's gonna be a great series.
Yeah, I mean, if you're a Dodgers fan, of course, you're hearkening back to '88 with Gibson and 2 outs and hitting the game-winning home run. That's this one was an extra innings, of course. It's a series that when you talk to a baseball fan and you're like, well, the 2 big money teams get to be in there, you're like, well, that's it's frustrating, but also they're the 2 best teams. Again, you talk about, you may not exactly be excited about how they put this thing together, but in theory, you want to see the best of the best, right? And that's what these 2 teams are. And kind of proved it last night, right? Going extra innings, and then the dramatics that happen afterwards. This feels like after that, it feels like a series that could go. It probably will go 6 or 7.
Yeah, I mean, I would hope so. That if anybody that's listened to us for any time at all know that I'm a huge Game 7 guy in baseball, because I feel like it's the best of the best. And it is the most drama. So, like I said, as a National League guy, I would like to see the Dodgers win. But I'm not. I'm not locked into that, but I do want to see 7 games just because I feel like baseball. This is just a great situation for baseball, what we have going on right now.
Yeah, and it's going to be. I mean, if nothing else, it'll probably slightly arrest the baseball is dying articles and stuff, because this likely will be the most watched World Series in quite some time, right? big markets, and then the people in the middle are going to be wanting to see them as well. You got a lot more casual fans going to watch because of these things. So, and it gives a baseball chance to, hopefully, maybe hook a couple people. And the games like last night will do that, right? The people that get excited about, about the drama that comes with it. So yeah, it's you don't want it to go back to the 50s when these two teams played, like every year in the World Series, 40s and 50s, right?
Yeah.
Before the Dodgers took off to LA. You wouldn't want that every year, but having it on the occasion is, I mean, one, it's nice to see. I mean, one, it does harken back to that history, but two is a nice boon for baseball.
Yes, I mean I'm never a big fan of the Subway series or this series or even a Boston LA series. You know what I mean? It's
Mhm.
one of those to where I guess mid market fan kind of turns away from that. But I don't know why this feels like perfect timing. Just because of what Otani is, what Judge is, Yamamoto coming over, it's Betts, Freeman. I don't know. Right now
Mhm.
it just seems like this is just the right time for baseball to have this showdown, and I was all for it.
Yeah. Yeah, and again, like I said, you don't want it constantly, but, um, I think we all like underdogs, and there are no underdogs in this series. I mean, it doesn't nobody could come in here saying, that this was two fairly evenly matched teams, two very, very strong teams, and two teams that have spent a lot of money. And so, yeah, there were no underdogs, which does, get people to think, well, I don't want to watch this. But I think once you get absorbed into it, and following along with it, it's going to be very interesting. So, but yeah, I don't know what it is about October. I guess it's the stage. I guess it's the fact that that one mistake could almost basically cost you your season. Um, but managers get a little crazy, and do some things that they probably normally wouldn't. Again, Coates coming in after not pitching for, I think I read this morning, 37 days, which is even
Mm.
longer than Michael Walker in 2014. Seeing, with the game on the line, and it just feels like a little bit of a panic move, right? And I think that and that's natural, that's normal. I mean, you're on that stage, you've got to figure out a way to get this done, but um, you wonder if managers didn't think about if just played the game instead of worrying about the stakes, if things might have been a little different.
Yeah, got a little cute. Yeah, um, yeah. I mean, ultimately through two pitches, one a huge out, and
Mhm.
then one is history.
What a
Yeah.
huge
I mean
out.
that. What's that?
I said it won a huge out. Um,
Yeah, yeah. Good point. Yeah. Just I don't know. I mean, they're getting beat up today when you have a lefty reliever out there that's been effective all
mhm,
this postseason. Yeah, and I mean, I understand that. It seems like these kind of decisions, of course, are under the spotlight because it was the only game of the night.
sure.
But yeah, for a guy that hadn't pitched in so long and is hurt, I mean,
Mhm.
it was on record of saying that hey, he wants to pitch in the series so his kids can see it because he may not pitch next year. You know what I'm saying? One of those deals, and you're like, this is a tough one.
Yeah. Be careful what you wish for, I guess.
Yeah,
Because everybody's gonna see him pitch in the World Series for the next, 100 years when they run the clips.
yeah. Good
So,
point. Yeah, that's
um,
so. Yeah, just it's kind of crazy.
yeah. Yeah, it is. And again, I mean, to some degree for as exciting as the World Series is, you know, I think as Cardinal fans, there's a decent chunk of us that are ready for this to be over because of what's gonna happen afterwards, right? The Cardinals started this transition this week, and we'll talk about it. But when the front office transitions, and again, like I said, we'll talk about it, but they also have a little bit of what do we know, right? They're not players, they're not anything like that. Here in the next, by the time we record next, depending on if we miss a week or anything, they could be, we could know if they're going to decline options. We can know what they're going to do here and there. Even heck, even a trade could have been made, although probably not. So I guess in some points, I mean, as much as we probably expect a nice grid World Series, part of me is like, let's skip to the end so we can see what the Cardinals are going to do.
Yeah, a little bit. I agree with that. There are I don't know. I do feel like there's a lot of newsworthy items right now, which I didn't anticipate this early.
Right.
Yeah, I feel like they're moving on things, and it's more what as Kevin Wheeler said on this week's best podcast in baseball. Joe Blow fan probably doesn't understand the ramifications of what's going on, but any of the nerds like us have seen it and be like, well, yeah, I did not think this would be as open as it was. Like, I didn't anticipate there to be an assistant general manager that made headlines, and I didn't feel like
Mhm.
John Jay was coming back. I felt like a situation if those guys were coming back, it would have been Schumacher and then Schumacher plus. But it seems like they're mapping out exactly, and they're being extremely visible in how they are rebuilding the developmental processes and the developmental jobs, and mapping out how those are going to go. Like they want that the McGee as the roving instructor. I thought was pretty
Mhm.
huge.
Yeah.
That's pretty big. I think that we're going to see more of that in the Andujar type or Okindo type role. And I don't know. I've been pretty impressed with how open they've been about some of the moves so far.
Yeah, I mean, granted, this is St. Louis when, like the assistant hitting coach becomes like a front page news if when they hire stuff. I mean, there is that desire for any kind of baseball knowledge that I think that some towns don't necessarily have. But I agree. I not only have they been, it's been in the press, but I've been just a little bit surprised that they've gone ahead and done the hiring too. I mean, I know that they want to get, and I can understand if they had an agreement in place or whatever the
Yeah,
case may be, but we're just kind of used to not having a lot of news until the World Series is over.
sure.
And this isn't, fire the manager news, which the Cardinals have done in the postseason as well. But it's still a little bit of, of front office news that, gets people talking about that and not the World Series. So it's not, I'm not saying baseball's, anybody cares beyond St. Louis. That's just a little bit surprising that this has come out, but it's good and it's interesting. Let's talk about the on field first, and then we'll get into the front office. And the Cardinals, like you said, bring in John Jay um, to, I guess, kind of be but kind of take Willie McGee's spot. I assume, to be outfielders and just kind of a general sounding board. And then they bring in Brant Brown to be the hitting coach. Um, and it's interesting to me that both of those guys have ties to Skip Schmaker.
Yeah.
Um, I don't know what that means, if anything. Because, I mean, you'd think Schumacher was going to get a manager job, but like I was messaging with Jeff Jones, and he pointed out the only two that are open are the one he just left, which he's not going back to, and the White Sox, which if you're an up and coming manager, do you really want to start with the White Sox? I
Yeah.
don't. I think he's gone beyond that. So he may sit out a year. And maybe that's why his staff feels like they can sign places, or maybe maybe the Cardinals can rope him in for a year or so in some sort of development state or coaching area. I don't know. I would be interesting to see if maybe they can work out something where knowing that he's probably going to be gone in a year or so, because whenever a really good managerial job opens up, he's probably on the top list.
Yeah, I would think so. And it's funny. I don't know if this is funny or dangerous, but the you and I have spoken for years about the how being too insular and being in a
Mhm.
silo and the
Yeah.
development and the organizational ties. But then when you bring these guys back, there's a comfort level to it, knowing that they come from a winning culture.
Yeah.
And here we are thinking, hey, we've got to blow this thing up because of X, Y, Z, and that's why the Cardinals are in the position that they are. But then, of course, you go back and you're thinking, okay, well, this makes a lot of sense just because we know where they came from. LaRussa singing Jay's praises is high to me,
Mhm.
and that's one of those things to where not like we're talking out of both sides of our mouth, but I do feel like not only are they reorganizing the development side of things, they're also bringing back a culture of of the set of standards that's expected in St. Louis.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that. you're right. We have talked about, and I always refer to that piece that I wrote, I think in 21 about, are the Cardinals too insular? And there has been that issue. In fact, I need to write on the Substack maybe this afternoon how that I think is finally changing. Because again, when they brought even when they brought Schumacher in, he had spent a lot of time here, but he'd also spent a lot of time in different organizations
Yeah.
and had obviously developed. And John Jay's the same way, right? I mean, he got his start in St. Louis, but he played for 3 or 4 things, and then his coaching experiences in Miami. Um, so, and I think it's less important for different viewpoints when you're looking at, even beyond, bench coaches and and coaches, right? I mean, sometimes that is where you need to have those extra players because they do have a connection to the organization while also knowing how the organization does things. Um, so if you're going to pick up former players and stuff, that's the place to put them. Um, and I think that John Jay is going to be very interesting. I want to see if the Cardinals lead the league in hit by pitch next year,
Hmm.
because of his tutelage. Um, but I'm interested. I think that's a good thing. I'm interested to see what Brant Brown brings. There's a lot of bees there. Um, Apparently Skip Schmaker recommended him highly. Um, but I also think this was a tough job to hire. We talked about this, I think, some. This is a tough job to hire because there's a non-zero chance. I mean, that Chaim Bloom is taking over next year, so there's a non-zero chance he's going to want to put his own stamp on the dugout, which means there's a decent chance this is a 1-year gig, right? I mean, you don't know that there's any security there. So I would have been thinking it would have been difficult to hire somebody. And, you know, I guess Brant Brown lasts all year. That's longer than he did in Seattle. So, um, but I don't know. I don't know if it factored in. I don't know if they looked at the other people or if that's like, this is a guy and, told him, hey, look, it's a 1-year deal. But, and I guess coaches are somewhat used to 1-year deals because there's not a whole lot of security if you're a manager or a coach.
Sure, and 100%, I agree with that. The uh, I don't think the lame dunk feeling is necessarily in the coaching staff, outside of maybe the manager, just because it's so short term anyway. You know where
Mhm.
my apprehension comes from on all these? Are we? I'm not so certain that Bloom's not pulling a lot of the triggers right now. Anyway, I
Oh yeah. Yeah.
I don't. Yeah, okay, good. Because I was like, even on with Gould and Wheeler this week on the Best Podcast, they said this is going to be a 1-year tryout for everybody. And while I agree with that, I don't think the I don't think the full I don't think Bloom's attention is 100% on development now. I think that I think that he definitely has a seat at the table and on the big league roster in the big league situation, which, of course everybody's going to say, well, of course he does. But I'm not so certain that he doesn't have a pivotal role in what's going on these hires.
Yeah, I don't I think that he's definitely got a say for sure. And Mo has said anything beyond 2025, if anybody's like a 2-year deal, 3-year deal, whatever they're going to do, or if they have whatever, a trade or something, he's going to be in the decision. Um, I don't, I don't know. I'm fairly sure he's on board with it. Don't get me wrong. I
Yeah,
wonder if he had said, no, I don't want Brant Brown, would they have gone ahead and done it anyway?
yeah.
Mo would have said, "Well, this is the guy I want, and he's only going to be here for a year. So when you're here, you can fire him, but we're going with it." I don't know. I think that's a possibility on these short term deals. I do think he has some. So, I mean, he knows what's going on. He gets to put his opinion in. I don't know if it weighs as much as it does for the other things. I mean, like, he hired Rob Cerfolio.
Hmm.
And that's him. That's all him. It really
Yeah.
sounds like. So, stuff like that, yeah. Stuff like, like I doubt he probably didn't have much of an opinion on John Jay, right? I mean, he's like, yeah, okay, fine, sure. I'm sure if he had some strenuous objections, they would take that into account. But I also imagine he's not too worked up about this stuff just because he knows that in a year he can change it if he needs to.
Yeah, 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 yeah. Yeah, good point. I know that Mo's still out front and doing the press and the things that I think that he's good at, while other people think he's terrible. Because he doesn't say anything. The I do think a lot of the strings are being played by Bloom at this point.
I think there's a good I think there's a good working relationship between
Yeah.
Mozeliak and Bloom that Mo probably has a general idea of his philosophy, and he's not gonna do anything that just completely counteracts that, right? Um, he's not bringing in Mike Matheny or anything of that nature. Um, and I think Mo kinda knows his role right now. And this is what Mo has wanted, to some degree too. I think it would be really interesting if you could sit him down and ask him truthfully, when did you see this culture, or when did you see things go off the rails? When did you decide you needed to do something about it? And, why was that high in bloom? Um, I think there could be some interesting discussions there, if you could get him to tell the truth, which is always a different story, right? I mean, maybe when he's retired, he'll write a memoir, and we can hear a lot about this stuff. Um, but yeah, I think that what happens on the field, and we've kind of said this, right? And what happens on the field in 2025 almost doesn't matter. I mean, you want to see development of people, but you're not necessarily, and they've said they're not necessarily, actively chasing wins and losses. So you know, the hitting coach or whatever, unless there was some guy that Bloom really liked because of some sort of philosophy, I think that he's probably willing to turn that over to whomever. And again, I don't know, I don't know if he hires hitting coaches or has hired hitting coach. It'd be interesting to see, I guess, to go back. But a lot of times that's coming through the manager as well, and I guess that means Ollie Marmol's on board with this. We haven't heard anything from Ollie this winter, I don't think, but I'm assuming he's on board with the changes to staff.
Yeah, yeah, I would hope so. Um, the it, Yeah, I mean, yeah, I would think that these are roundtable discussions. I would assume about who's being brought in, just to make sure that it's not a toxic situation in the dugout. I mean,
Yeah,
Jay's going to
yeah,
fit in. There's a history, obviously a history there.
right.
And then the rest of it kind of goes downhill. And we don't know how well these guys know each other anyway, or what the hiring process is on a lot of these guys and the vetting process. But I would assume I would assume Brant Brown's name is well known in baseball at this point. Type
Yeah,
situation.
yeah.
Um, I do have a question for you though.
Hmm.
Um, we're under the assumption that they're kicking 2025, right? Or they're gambling with the best case scenario. As far as we're going to play the kids, we're going to develop, we're going to start development from the bottom up. Is there any element to this where Mozeliak doesn't want to go out on a rebuilding year just because of what the the fondness and the respect and how else I can put it, he has for the DeWitts and the DeWitts have for him?
I think given his preference, he'd like to go out, with a contending team or a winner. But I also think that from everything he has said, and I think it's fair to take him at his word. Um, he has a fondness, a respect, maybe love for this organization, and he realizes that for it to be good, it needs this.
Yeah.
And it probably has realized to the point that for it to be good, it's time for him to, give way to
Sure.
new voices. So, do I think that he's going to, in the middle of the season, try to, when if they're at the trade deadline, is he going to make some big splash trade if they're real close? No, I don't think so. I think he's going
No.
to stay the
Yeah.
course because they always has. But, you know, is there a situation where they're, contending at the trade deadline and they add pieces that may not be huge, but then yeah, I think that's still. I think the DeWitts, if they can, if it's going to be a balancing act if it gets to that, and we don't know that it's going to. I mean, I think this is a team that we haven't seen what it looks like yet. I still think it's a team that could be, at 500 or so. I mean,
Last year's
kind of
team.
like yeah, kind of
Exactly.
like
No, I
yeah.
agree. Yeah.
And so there's a possibility that depending on what the rest of the division looks like or anything else, they could be, within a handful of games at the wild card at the trade down there close to it. And I do think that the DeWitts, to have a little bit of Omo, a little bit of that too, right? To give him the best chance to go out with, a winning team. But it's a balancing act because we've talked about, the resources that go here don't go into development. And at this point in time, at the midseason, at the trade deadline, a lot of those resources have already been poured into development, so they may not be available. Now, does that mean that DeWitt's open their pockets and say, okay, we're going to give you this, $10 million, $10 million going away gift in the fact that we're going to go, get another player? Maybe, I don't know. But I think Mo is comfortable with his overall body of work, that as much as he would like to go out with a winner, um, he's fine not.
Maybe
Because I'd like to know.
set him.
I can't remember. Yeah, I can't remember when he signed his extension, but you know, he could have easily, left at the end of, you know, I don't know, 2021 maybe, although 2022, I don't know. I mean, they didn't go deep, but they were in the playoffs. He could have left if he wanted to not run the risk, but I'm sure he didn't necessarily see 2023 and 2024 coming either. So, um, I just don't think it's a high priority for him. I guess that's what I'm trying to say.
Sure. Well, and that's part of my question is maybe reading too much into it. I agree with everything that you just said too. It, I don't think there's going to be any big moves. I think that at best I could see there is an improvement around the edges if they're close, but
Yeah,
that's
yeah,
maybe no different than what they've ever done. You know what I
right.
mean? I think
True.
that you and I can talk for the last 15 years of there being, one huge culture shift trade, which would be Rasmus, that changed everything, and everything else is, yes, they've improved, but nothing's been as drastic as that was. So I don't think we're going to have to worry about that, and we have the excuse that they never do it anyway. But I do kind of wonder if the term reset and whatnot. There's a part of me that thinks they think they're going to be better than what the general public thinks they're going to be, and they feel like there may have been a blockade on the development anyway
Mhm.
of their own doing. Don't get me wrong,
Right, right.
where they're like, "Hey, we're going to give these guys a chance, and we're safe because our expectations are going to be low. But on the flip side, we think that they're going to grow into be pretty dang good players, and that's why we're doing what we're doing." So I think there may be some of that, and I think that you're right. I think that it's going to be. Let's put it this way: next year's record, if next year's record matches this year's record, that's a success.
Yeah.
And that may be the best way of going out and saying like, "Hey, look what these guys are going to do." And that's kind of my question of I think that in a situation of already bringing home and winning two World Series in your tenure there, one as general manager, one as assistant, and then bridging the gap. But that was clearly a mess in the 7 and 8 stages with
Hmm.
Jockey going
Right.
out and with Luno coming in, and bridging that gap and mending those fences. I think that the track record is good enough to where he's ultimately going to wear the red jacket. That being said, you're probably right. I think that's enough to where you're still going out on your own terms no matter what happens here. And 23 could potentially be be the black eye to the whole thing.
Mhm.
And I think they know that. I think that the upside for this team is as good as they've had in the past 3 or 4 years. Um, Even if you do trade some of these contracts.
Well, and I think that big gifts, a lot of big gifts here. But if they won the World Series in 2027, or I say, but they did it with, not only the players that we're seeing now, but this new development group, right? I mean, whatever that may be, that hired the better drafting or whatever. If basically if Mo can say he planted the seeds of the next World Series championship
Sure.
here, I think that nope, my mic moved on me. Um, I think that's big for him too. Um, but that remains to be seen whether that's happening or not.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm curious. Some of the comments were, how has he approached veteran players, and it was a comment of, well, we've told them that the youth are going to play and we're going to develop. That's one of those that could be a drastic statement, but who's he talking to? You
Right,
know, because
right,
there's not a whole lot of it on the roster.
right. I mean, yeah, if you're telling Lance Lynn and Kyle Gibson that, then, they understand and you're not,
Yeah,
they probably don't want their option picked up. You're telling, and again, you're telling Sonny Gray and John Denton was on the radio this week, talking about how Nolan Arenado doesn't want to go through a rebuild. And I know he doesn't want to do that and all that kind of stuff. I think that's John Denton projecting a bit. But also, again, this is, when you talk about rebuilds, in my mind, and I think the general idea is you're talking about 65 wins for like 3 or 4 years
yeah.
while you're getting high draft picks. And then, then eventually you're good. And that's not what this is going to be, because they've got so many of these guys already on the roster. They don't have all this high priced talent. They just have to strip away and, play guys that should be in AAA for 3 years. That's not what this is. I mean, they've got a guy that's probably going to win a Gold Glove at shortstop as a
Yeah,
rookie.
100%. Yeah.
He just won the Fielding Bible Award this year. Oh, and may win the overall Fielding Bible. I mean, and not only that, he's not just and he hit 15 home runs to go with it. I mean, you've got a guy in Nolan Gorman, which again, we'll have to wait and see how that works, but he's a guy that's, 40 home run power at early 20s. Um, you got people like Avon Herrera behind, like you could put behind the plate if Contreras is gone and not miss a whole lot, right?
Yeah.
It would, as he develops. You've got Newtbar and you've got Donovan and you've got, again, are all these guys going to be all stars? No, but they're going to be good enough that you're not going to be wallowing in the bottom. They're not going to be a Chicago White Sox situation. You're not going to be Houston Astros or Chicago Cubs when they tanked. This is not a team that, this is a team that we'll see how it looks, but it'd be a surprise if it didn't win 75 games next year, right? Which, granted, coming in there 500 is not great, and maybe that's not what people like Gray or Contreras or Arenado want. But I also think that, when they look at these teams, they're going to say, look, this team may not be that far. And especially Nolan, he spent a whole lot of time trying to get to St. Louis. Maybe the experience hasn't been what he wanted, and maybe he really has this urgent drive to win, which, fair. But if he had an urgent drive to win, he wouldn't have limited his options to St. Louis and the Dodgers when he was looking to leave Colorado. And
Yeah.
I'm not discounting Arenado's desire to win. I'm just saying that if he really, if that's the only thing that mattered to him, he would have had the Yankees on that list. He would have had Houston on that list. He would have had, 3 or 4 other places that he would have gone to because they were always going to be right there, right? Honestly, when he got traded to St. Louis, they were, they hadn't made it to the World Series in a number of years. They were still a playoff team, but they weren't necessarily going deep. In fact, 17, 18, they had missed completely. So it wasn't like, it has a tradition and it has a history. And yes, if you want to win, going to St. Louis makes sense. But if that's the only thing you're worried about, I don't know that St. Louis was one of 2 options on your list.
Sure. Well, and I thought you mapped it out well a couple weeks ago to where a Gray makes sense to move because his contract being what it was and being a fairly short term for a free agent contract, he
Mhm.
probably won't, he potentially may not be here for the backside of any kind of reset.
Sure,
Where
sure.
with barring trade, um, Arenado's going to be.
Mhm.
You know what I mean? And I thought you mapped that out well last week. I get the feeling you think he stays. I
I
think you
I
were pretty
mean,
open about that with our percentages last week too,
yeah,
which I like.
and again, I'm biased. I really like Arenado. I wanted him to be a Cardinal, so I get that. I'm gonna, anybody can discount that. But I look how complicated that trade was to get him here. And then you're adding this wrinkle of, okay, well, okay, the Cardinals are going to pay some money, and then now the Rockies are going to pay some money, and what are you going to? And the fact that he's had a little bit of a down year, although he is also nominated for the Gold Glove, he's bounced back a little bit in that regard. I just don't think you're going to get a lot for him. I think that unless he really wants to leave, I think they're going to keep him. If he has this desire to, maybe now he's like, hey, I'm coming to the closer to the end of my career. I'll talk to the Yankees. I'll talk to whoever. Then maybe that, if he really wants to go, they'll accommodate him. But I just don't think that. I expect Nolan Arenado to be starting at third base on opening day next year.
Yeah. No, I completely agree. And there's a part of me that is he the one the is he the last one standing? Do you see a
Mm.
Gray moving? I know that we gave our percentages last week, but did the presser change anything for you on that?
I don't know that it did. Um, I I just don't know that I mean, we don't know enough about the conversations that they've had with players. Um, we don't know, honestly, we still don't know what the market is either, right? I mean, I don't think that they just want to give away people, right? I don't think they want to trade Gray for some single A lottery ticket just to save the money. Um, I mean, they'd like to save the money, like to put the money in development, but I think they'd want to get value back. And what that looks like, what the markets look like, I don't know. But no, I'm still I am. If you told me that all three of those guys, that the only changes, big money changes to this team was that they didn't sign Paul Goldschmidt and they declined the option on Lynn and Gibson both. But everybody else was staying. I would 100% believe that.
Yeah, yeah, that's. I'm curious. I want to see how much movement they have. I mean, it's one of those to where the any of the option pickup on the pitchers. I just don't at this point. I know we've talked about it. One of most and try to trade Michaelis type situation.
Mhm.
Um, the Gray situation. I don't know. I mean, I really don't know. I mean, personally, as somebody that wants to see him compete next year, I hope he comes back. The
Mhm.
Contreras deal, I think it makes you look terrible to trade after 2 years. And I know it's baseball and I know what happens, but I think that you're going to have a hard time getting guys in on a money talks, but it's just not the best look. But you do have Herrera behind, but that's the one. The I feel like it has to be a huge haul from a West Coast team to get rid of our Arenado at this point.
Yeah.
It's kind of how I felt, and it would not surprise me at all if he stays and the other two do as well. I mean, I don't
Mhm.
know. And then from there, you build on your back, which it build from your minor league system, and like I still think you're as good as last year, regardless.
Yeah. Yeah. I'd say on Contreras, I'm understanding where you're coming from with the 2 years, dealing somebody out.
Yeah,
I will say that if he comes out and says, "Hey, this was great, but I want to trade," or something of that nature, where it makes it at least seem like or fairly clear that it's his decision. I think that lessens that impact quite a bit. When players look and say, "Look, I have a say here," if this doesn't go right, it wasn't that, hey, he was terrible for 2 years and they ditched him, Now, the stuff that happened last year with that you still have to deal with, but, I don't know that dealing him would hamper your free agent stuff too much. If nothing else, you're gonna have a different GM and stuff, or, president of baseball operations, all that stuff.
well,
That front
yes,
office is different by the time you start signing people like that, and you say,
very true.
"Hey, that was them, this is us," that kinda stuff.
Yeah, very true. Very true. Um it's going to be an interesting few weeks. You're right
Yeah.
because by the time we get back on, essentially or potentially, we'll know the options. Which
Mhm.
I'm not so certain we don't know the options now. I is the way that I get is the feeling that I get. I mean, it's I I don't know. I'm torn on this one because I keep thinking, do they want that stability in the rotation with one more guy? Is that stability going to be who you have on multiple year in Gray?
Mm. Yeah. I mean, it does depend, right? I mean,
Yeah.
if Gray says, "Hey, I'm fine staying," then yeah, they probably decline both those options and deal with that, right? Um, if he says, "Hey, I'm gonna need to move," then you either pick up one of those or you have to make Miles Michaelis your guy again, and I don't think anybody wants to do that.
No, I mean
Um,
that's yeah.
I mean, I mean, yeah, I don't know what you do there, but yeah, I don't know. I don't really know. My gut feeling. I think one time was Lynn declined and Gibson picked up, but Lynn has said over the last week or so that he wants to continue to play.
Hmm.
And I mean, I'm sure he'll go wherever, but after he made such an impact coming back, do they try to pick that one up instead of Gibson? I don't know. I mean, you could argue from statisticals that Lynn had a better year, even though it
Yeah.
didn't, just because he had a better second half versus Gibson's. But I don't know that I'd want to bet on that for next year. So,
Well, and you're right. And it's one of those when you look at it, Gibson probably gave you what you expected. You
right,
know what I mean? Because the pitching wasn't the problem.
right.
I think we agree with that. Um, yeah, I don't know. I mean, is there any world? I mean, does it make any sense at all? And does the possibility exist that they do both of them?
They pick up both of them.
Yeah, or is that just block too many guys?
I can't, especially if Gray's traded, you would have Lynn, Gibson, Michaelis, and then Palante,
And
and
Matt's
then what?
essentially
Yeah,
right.
maybe Matz, or if you want to argue him into the bullpen, then you have one spot for a McGreevy or Graceffo or whoever the case may
Which
be.
one of those guys? I mean, one of those have as far as Graceffo and McGreevy, they break the next year on the rotation, right?
I I think so.
Yeah,
Um, I think it's probably. I mean, it may really be a competition in spring training. We talk about spring training
I
competitions
like
all the
that.
time, and they're not really, but they might be. I think McGreevy has the edge because of how he pitched down the last little bit in St. Louis. I mean, he actually got. I'd have to look, but I bet he got more. He got more time in St. Louis than Graceffo did, right? I mean, because Graceffo only made like did he make like one start and then a couple, maybe a bullpen or two appearance? I don't remember. I don't think he got very much time, which may mean they're not high on him, which may mean nothing. Um, but I'd say McGreevy has the edge right now. Um, assuming they can't pull like if you trade Wilson Contreras, maybe you get a triple A prospect pitcher that
Yeah.
and you can start plugging in. But
Well,
assuming not like that, yeah, I think you have to have assumed that McGreevy somebody they need spots for that, and that's why I can't imagine them picking up both. And I honestly, the more I start thinking about it, if they don't think they can get rid of Michaelis, I just don't know that they pick up either one of them.
yeah, yeah, it's going to be difficult because that's the contract with the 1 year remaining. That's the most difficult to move, I would think. I mean, that's going to be an eat money
Yeah.
situation. I would you have to
Oh
do
yeah.
regardless
Yeah.
whether that's a trade or a you thank you for your service call. And that's also their rotation could be built at some point in 25 by what you get for Helsley too.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's going to be interesting as well. I mean, there are going to be should be an influx of talent coming in. So we'll see how that pans out. We've gotten this far into the show. We haven't actually talked about the front office changes too much, but let's kind of shift a little bit to that. And Robert Cerfolio is hired as the assistant GM in charge of player development. Interesting to me that he comes out of Cleveland, which is, I mean, again, someplace else. It gets us back to that idea of being less insular with now that you have Bloom, and now you have Cerfolio, and then he gets to hire. Sounds like the farm director and one other spot. I don't remember exactly which it was. In theory, I mean, maybe that comes from Cleveland, maybe that comes from someplace else, but it really is starting to feel like that wall that we've talked about, that insularness is significantly cracking to the point that they're
Sure.
getting some new ideas in here from different organizations.
Agreed. And you go from what I thought was big about it is you go from you bring him in as one you would assume progressive in age alone from a very
Yeah.
progressive organization to go, and I would be willing to bet that what if that your farm director isn't from Cleveland, he's going to have Cleveland ties of some sort. and
Probably, yeah.
and I think that's you can see the development model that teams are trying to the Cardinals being the team are
Mhm.
trying to model, and that's and honestly, any of these moves that get announced are always exciting to me, because I'm
Mhm.
thinking, okay, fresh set of eyes and somebody that's clearly highly thought of on this, because
Yeah.
that's we knew there would be some front office changes, but I didn't think it would be one that was as visible and announced as this has been.
Yeah, it was interesting. It was also very interesting to me, I mean, I don't know, it's very interesting, but kinda interesting that, Chaim Bloom has worked for the Rays, worked for the Red Sox, and yet here he is tapping somebody out of Cleveland, right? It
Yeah,
wasn't, which makes you feel like this was the right guy for the job, or this is a guy that's, made his name out there that people are thinking about, and it's not just a guy that Bloom worked with that he was impressed with, right? So,
yeah,
I think that's kind of interesting and fun. I mean, and again, coming from an organization that has developed a lot of players, how much he had impact on that, I don't know, but he obviously had some, right? I mean, at least nothing else, he took some of their best practices with him. Um, I did find it very interesting, when I was looking him up. He was actually, at least on some lists, a candidate for the manager job, in Cleveland before they, with
wow,
Voigt. I mean, that's, and he pitched at
it's a
Yale, and
Yale, yeah.
yeah, so, but I find that interesting a little bit because it's not the mm, I mean, granted, Cleveland is a little bit progressive on things like that, but, you wouldn't expect a guy that could be a manager to then, be this job. But even when the list that I was reading, it was like this. We don't know how this would work because he's a he really sounded like a front office guy trying to manage. So maybe that's why he didn't get the job. But still, it was kind of interesting. So I'm excited to see, one, where he hires from. Like you said, he probably will have Cleveland ties. It's not a guy that, he's 32. I don't know how long he's been in the industry. What, 10 years maybe. Um, may not have a real deep Rolodex of people, but if he hires somebody from, you know, the Dodgers or from, a different organization as well, I think that's just even better because we're getting more and more of how other people do it, and we can decide what works for St. Louis.
Sure, and it's to me, it hasn't been lost on the I like what they're doing. The fact that they're going after a progressive group that's going to change the dynamic of what happens in the development side of things and
Mhm.
build from the bottom up. But they're bridging the gap by bring a special assistant to the front office, which I don't think is going to be just a title job for McGee
Right.
from that era to bring back Jay, to bring back guys that Schumacher has gone to bat for. You still keep Marmol. I think that what I do like is that they're bridging the gap between the development processes, which needed to be reshuffled, which jobs need to be added, which finances need to be, which they need to add money to the system to bring it up to now they're bringing in more of a winning culture type player that they have done recently, but I think that now they're starting to mend those fences between the development and then to bring into the culture that's expected in St. Louis and the standards. I thought
Mhm.
that was funny that you moved your McGee up to have a more pivotal role through everything, but bringing a 34-year-old hotshot to run the bottom of it, and to me that's exciting. I mean, that's one of those what I would love to be involved in a process like they're going through right now.
Yeah. Yeah, and I will say on McGee, have been a little bit surprised that he has stayed a coach for as long as he did. I remember when he was hired, what, 6, 7 years ago now, longer maybe. Um, there was it really, kind of reading in the stories, it really felt like they kind of drug him into the coaching thing, and that
Yeah,
wasn't necessarily what he wanted to be. And I honestly thought it'd be probably a 1-year deal or something like that, and it lasted. But I mean, one, he's 65. I mean, and two, I think, yeah, this gives him a chance to go to all the minor leagues, to work with those players and, work with and teach and stuff like that, which seems to be what he likes to do, and has an impact. I mean, I think we've heard of players talking about how much they've learned from Willie McGee. So to be able to then free him up to do that, because he couldn't do that as a major league coach. He had to be with the team all the time. So to be able to free him up to go to Springfield, to go to Palm Beach, yeah, I think that's a huge thing.
They just won't go away.
All right, Zencastr apparently was tired of us and gave us some sort of weird issue, cut us off in the middle of my probably deep and impactful, insightful commentary. So if there's anything that you don't like, is probably counteracted in that part. But anyway, we were talking about Willie McGee, and I don't know where it cut off, so if I repeat myself, I'm sorry. But just the fact that he gets to go to all the minor leagues and really do the coaching that he wants to do, I think is a huge thing. And it gives them that chance to continue, as you said, to continue the Cardinal way, but able to modify that to keep the traditions, but also update it for what they need to do to be a winner now.
Yeah, and that's well put, because that's kind of the way that I was looking at it, because there was I didn't think they were ever going to blow it up. I didn't think that it was going to be let's change the dynamic of what our expectations are here to this, and that kind of points to, yeah, that's I think that's where we are with this. I think that there's like, we see what's happening, and it's the fact that the fact that the developmental process has slowed it's ground to a halt, honestly, to where the guys just aren't succeeding on the big league level, because there's not enough eyes on them, and there's not enough hands helping that other organizations have done, and they're bringing out the best in some of their players that are coming up, and we've seen that really slow down. That being said, I think the developments to come up and to maintain the culture that the Cardinals have had for all these years. And that says a lot to me, because, we get the spoiled fans moniker, because, we never have I say we, but there's never the long losing streaks, the long skids, the 4 or 5 years of being under 500 and stuff like that. And it kind of stinks that the dynamic had to shift due to the lack of revenue coming in the seats. But it is shifting. But it is shifting to a point to where it's going to be a lot of the things that we don't see initially, but we may in a year or two of seeing these guys reach the big leagues and succeed like they used to where you would see these guys come up, and that would be their call, and they would take off from there, which we haven't seen in the last 10 years, but while still maintaining the expectation, culture, and pride that you have as an organization over all these years.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, yeah, I agree. I think that's the biggest thing, is they're gonna have to try to blend that together, because you want to still be the Cardinals, but you also need to be competitive too, and just doing the same old thing isn't necessarily going to get you anywhere, as we've seen. Um, yeah, I think that it's going to be a very, very interesting. I think a development thing is also going to be kind of interesting. You know, what does that mean? We talked about Graceffo and McGreevy coming up and being part of that rotation, and maybe that's the case, especially for like a McGreevy. But is this a situation like for JJ Weatherholt or something of that nature? Do they stay in the minors a little longer than maybe they would have, or you would think, because they are learning there and they don't worry about, hey, they can help the big league club, so we're going to bring them up, kind of like we've seen the last few years, right? That they might bring somebody up a little bit too fast because they think they can help the big league club right then. I wonder if they'll just say, well, they could help the big league club, but long term, it's better if they, spend another month in Memphis or something like that, and go with that. I don't know. I think that's gonna be an interesting thing to see how they maybe change their approach on how long people stay in the minor leagues.
Yeah, no, no, I agree with that. I think that there's going to be, I think that will be one of the more visible things this year, to be like, hey, he's breaking down here. How come we're not getting a call when we can't? How come he can't get the call when the big league team can't hit? And I think that's going to be the thing that we see more this year. That there's not going to be a lot of for lack of a better term, the willy nilly call ups. You know what I mean? I think that you're going to see a lot of patience on those things.
Yeah. which is going to be interesting. I mean, because there are players that we have seen at the major league level. I think of Victor Scott II. Does is his development at the point where he's done all he can in Memphis, or it didn't feel like it, right? I mean, it does feel like he could probably play Memphis again. Um, but he has also held his own at the major league level, so maybe, I don't know. I think that's going to be very interesting because I know there's been a lot of talk about Siani being like the favorite and the starting center fielder and all that kind of stuff. I'm I just don't think that's a good idea. Which I'm just a guy behind a microphone, so that doesn't mean anything. But it just feels like we may have seen the best we could see Siani this year. I mean, defensively, obviously, yes. But if he should be your fourth outfielder, defensive replacement guy that plays twice a week, as a starter maybe. And Victor Scott felt like he had more to his game. But you could make I think a safe argument that he could spend a little bit more time in Memphis with Willie McGee or whoever, this new development staff that they're working on, and maybe learn a little bit more, especially defensively, before he comes up. So I don't know. I think those are the kind of situations that could be interesting as well.
Yes, yeah. Yeah, that's. I mean, I all of this talk kind of gets me fired up about the things that we could see. I I do wonder, where does Victor Scott play into this right now? Is that going to be a, hey, you need to improve your all around game right now, and he's not going to be the fourth outfielder with expectation by June or the break at latest he's going to be your number one outfielder? Is there any? Do you agree with that at all?
I think that, yeah. I mean, I think that if they think he's the fourth outfielder, he plays in Memphis. I
Yeah,
don't think that he's up here, you know, just splitting time with Siani either. If they think he's got a long term future, which I mean, it feels like he should. I mean, he's young. He's shown really really good stuff. I think even at the major league level, he's got some learning to do. But yeah, I think if it's one of those situations, because part of that they brought him up was I think to some degree work with Willie McGee, and he wasn't getting the coaching in Memphis, and then they sent him back down. So that who knows, but I think that with these kind of adding some instructors and things like that, if he can get that kind of that kind of teaching at Memphis this year that he probably should have overall, I think they'd be fine with doing that. That said, if they think that he's better than Siani now, then they very well may go with him. But I don't think he's sitting the bench. I guess is what I'm saying.
yeah, that's kind of what I'm thinking too. Especially, I think that there's going to be more one-on-one work to improve him as an outfielder and definitely as a hitter. You know what I mean? I think there needs to be growth in some sense, because I think Scott's the perfect example of probably getting called before yes, he pushed his way into that situation. We know that. But I think that may have been a call up that was too quick, and Siani
Yeah.
kind of proved that that he could handle the job now, and probably that Scott needed more development. And that's kind of my question. I'm just kind of wondering if there's going to be some patience on him more than anybody, with the expectation that hey, this is how do I say it? He's going to be the starting center for a long time, and he's going to take it
Yeah.
at some point this year.
Yeah. I also think that with Bloom in charge, with this focus on development, you don't have you're not going to have somebody come to spring training and have a really good spring training and push their way onto the roster. I just don't see it. I mean, we talked about McGreevy and Graceffa having competition, and that's a little different, right? Because those are
Yeah,
guys that have had some experience. You're not going to see Jordan Walker, Victor Scott have those strong springs, and all of a sudden are on the opening day roster when
yeah,
nobody expected that when spring training started. I think that they're gonna. I mean, one, they should, right? Just looking at the last couple of years and how that's worked, but two, because there's not that focus on the major league team, I think they'll say, "Look, I know you hit 500 in spring training against, double A and triple A pitchers in situations that don't matter. You're still going to Memphis, or Springfield or wherever it may be, because you got a lot more to learn." And I think that's that's a good thing. I think that we've talked about it the last couple of years. We didn't think that Jordan Walker should have gotten it out of spring training 2 years ago. We didn't think that Victor Scott should have this last year. That Michael Ciani could have covered it and all that. So I think that that's going to be a different focus that we'll see coming this spring.
Yeah, that's those are going to be the more visible changes, I think, right away. That guys aren't going to be rushed, and that's in a situation like that. Then it makes a lot of sense for the Siani, bringing him back anyway.
Right.
Because that'll probably be opening day guy without a lot of rush to see what's going to happen now. So yeah, no, I completely agree with that.
All right. Well, we've gone about an hour. I do want to mention a little bit. I saw it this morning on the Twitter account of Augie Nash, which, I mean, if you're listening to this, you're probably following Augie. He should be. He's, got all sorts of great Cardinal history information, but he did note that it's 10 years today that Oscar Tavares died in his car accident. Um, and that's a situation, I mean, it's a situation I don't think that the Cardinals have ever recovered completely from. Um, I think that when you look at the last 10 years, you wonder how much gets tied to that moment, right? Because I don't know. That was probably maybe putting a little too much on it, but there's no doubt that the focus of the organization shifted when they didn't have Oscar Tavares coming up as the next big thing. A guy that we're kind of seeing with Jordan Walker, but a guy that one of the top prospects in baseball looked to be a superstar, and when they didn't have that, it felt like that's starting a cascade that maybe led to where we are today.
Yeah, that's well put. Even 10 years down the line, I mean, I catch myself thinking about that all the time. It's hard to believe that it was 10 years ago.
Yeah, no doubt.
Two, it did feel like that was the gut punch in development that really started shaking things down. Because if you remember, he was kind of the Jordan Walker now, to where yes, there was signs of life, but he hadn't reached his potential yet. I mean, I'll never forget the last at bat. I was thinking in San Francisco, I was like, this is going to be the time that he makes the play. But then, of course, he popped out weekly, type deal.
Mhm.
But I had zero doubt that he was going to be a huge big league contributor. Then to hear how it happened and all that good stuff is just,
Yeah.
just a sad state of affairs. But I do agree with you. I think that that's where the downward trend started on the development side of stuff.
Yeah, because of course they make the trade for Hayward, and I really think they thought that was going to be a long term solution, and it wasn't, which has turned out to be a good thing.
Yeah.
Um, Shelby Miller goes in that deal, and Shelby Miller's just still bouncing around or was. Who knows what that would have been. There's no telling. I mean, you can't trace everything back to that, but you do wonder if they started to think, they didn't want to put all their eggs in a prospect basket. Um, I don't know. I don't know. And again, another situation would be interesting to talk with the people that were in the room, and talk about how things might be different. But it is a sad thing. I agree. It does not seem like it's been 10 years. But it's a hard thing. And the car, in a stretch where the Cardinals, I mean, as you remember, as a lot of fans remember, they would go through that stretch where, you had Darryl Collin 02, and then you had Josh Hancock at 07, and then to
Yeah.
have that, it felt, I mean, you never, I mean, I think there's lots of generations of Cardinal of fans that don't lose a player, right, while they're active. And here the Cardinals lost 3 in the span of, just over a decade. That was kind of hard. I mean, it just kind of felt like there's consistently this really tough thing coming at us. And thankfully that's has not been the case since. I mean, now we have lost the legends and stuff, but that's a little, that's different. You expect that. Um, and hopefully we don't have to go through it again.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
I think there's been enough heartache. You know what
yeah,
I'm saying
yeah,
at this point.
I think so. All right. Well, that's a fun thing to end on. But Alan
Have
and
a good weekend.
I, yeah, Alan and I'll be back at you maybe next week, probably in a couple weeks. We'll just have to see how things plan out and paying out. But until then, for Alan, I'm Daniel. Good night.
Good night.
Today, I'd like to look back at Tom Lawless and what was undoubtedly the greatest bat flip in Cardinals history on October 21st, 1987, in Game 4 of that year's World Series. In fact, it may have been the greatest bat flip in the history of bat flips. It's that good. And check it out on YouTube. In the video, you can see the 5'11", 170-pound Lawless pull the ball deep to left field, then stand at home plate to admire his shot. As the ball sails into the night air at Busch Stadium, Wallace takes just a step or two, watching the ball the whole way. The camera zooms out quickly, giving the impression that his home run could be headed to the second deck and isn't just barely clearing the wall. When it lands, Wallace heaves the bat over his shoulder in a way that might lead you to think that this wasn't just his second career home run. Now, prior to this game, Wallace's chief claim to fame was that he and Mickey Mahler had been traded to the Expos in the deal that sent Pete Rose to Cincinnati. In St. Louis, Wallace was a seldom used reserve whose chief value lay in his versatility. Despite playing the infield, outfield, and even catching, Wallace had never played more than 54 games in a season, and despite playing 3 seasons in St. Louis, the 30-year-old had just 25 regular season hits with the club. As Rick Hummel wrote in the St. Louis Post-Dispatch, Wallace always seems to be the number 3 player at a position where only 2 players play. So how was Wallace in the starting lineup for Game 4 of the World Series? Well, Terry Pendleton was injured, and Whitey Herzog was in need of a right-handed bat to face Twins left-hander Frank Viola. With Wallace batting 8th, the two teams traded runs in the 3rd inning before our fearless slugger broke the game open in the 4th. Tony Pena drew a walk to lead off the inning, and Jose Oquendo singled to right before Wallace came to the plate. When Wallace hit Viola's bell-high fastball, a fan seated near Wallace's wife shouted, "Run, run, you didn't hit it that hard." For his part, Wallace wasn't even aware of his reaction. Quote, "I saw the TV replay where I flipped my bat, but I don't even remember doing it," he said. "I kind of went blank. I'd never been in that position before." Twins third baseman Gary Gaetti, who hit 31 home runs that season, was impressed by Wallace's home run trot. "He was styling," Gaetti said. "God, he was styling. He's done that a lot of times, right? Why not milk it? That's one of the better ones I've seen." With a 4-1 lead in hand, the Cardinals added on as Jim Lindemann added his second RBI single of the game and Willie McGee hit a 2-run double. With a 7-1 lead, the Cardinals got 2 2/3 innings of relief from Bob Forsch, and Ken Daly threw another 2 2/3 innings for his 3rd save of the postseason. It proved to be a big evening for Daly, not only because of the save, but because he was no longer the only major league pitcher to allow Wallace to hit a home run off of him. Daly explained to reporters that Wallace still had the home run ball from when they faced each other in 1984, and he'd been threatening to bring it to the clubhouse for Daly to sign. Wallace played one more season in St. Louis, collecting 10 hits, including a home run, in 54 games. That December, the Cardinals released him. He signed with Toronto for the 1989 and 1990 seasons before he retired to begin his coaching career. Over the course of 8 major league seasons, if you include the playoffs, Wallace finished with 113 career hits for an average of just a little over 14 per season, and he hit just 3 total home runs. So that's a quick look back at Tom Wallace in Game 4 of the 1987 World Series. For more Cardinals history, visit stlredbirds.com or follow me on Twitter at Remembirds, REMEMBIRDS. Thanks again, and go Cards.
Did we really see that? He hit 080 during the regular season. He has 1 lifetime home run. Here's his second. Not only that, he knows the trot. Look at this. His second major league home run. Quite timely. Oh!